Hello, I'm King Link and this is my review of Sunset Overdrive, created by Insomniac Games and published by Xbox Games Studio. Insomniac is a well-known developer. They're the guys who made Ratchet and Clank, Resistance, Spyro, and of course Marvel's Spider-Man. Remember to respect that hyphen. They have been a solid developer over their entire career with fun and inventive gameplay. Sunset Overdrive is the first game from them on a Microsoft console, and it's the first one on PC as well. So let's take a look at Sunset Overdrive. One quick note, if you enjoyed the video and want more, remember to subscribe and click that bell to get notified when I post new videos, and thank you. Sunset Overdrive is one of the most vibrant games I've seen in a while, perhaps ever. You'll see throughout this entire review, this is the anti-military shooter that's washed in grays and brown. There's a ton of graphical design here, and I can't even think of a point with this game where you get like a typical look. This game just oozes color from every pore. But before we really look at the world, let's talk about the character. We'll start with the normal character creation, and you can not only choose male or female, but also the body type. I went with a huge beefy guy who can take on any challenge. Now, yes, this doesn't change anything in Sunset Overdrive, but I really like the design of this body. There's also something missing on this initial character creation, like clothes. Don't worry too much. Before the first hour is up, you'll be able to customize your character further and choose outfits that you want. It helps create a more special character. And again, here, there's not many options for clothing. So after a little more playtime, you actually get the ability to buy clothes from stores, and sure enough, you'll have a ton more customization here. It's a great touch and absolutely worth spending some time on. Also, the money spent on the clothes is a different currency from the money spent on gameplay elements, so that was a great way to allow people to customize without taking something away from other parts of Sunset Overdrive. The player customization is a big part of the agency of the player in this game, and if you want to keep messing with it, you're going to constantly find new outfits and pieces as you play, especially getting rewards from missions with them. I stuck to about 3 outfits in the game, but there's always new pieces of clothing that appeared as I played the game. Sunset Overdrive, though, is crazy colorful, like I mentioned. There's a lot of clever little tricks such as Sunset Overdrive throwing words into the graphical effects. You know, apocalypse, get home, even later on we'll see pop. It's just another way that the game keeps everything feeling a bit lighthearted and fun. On the other hand, though, the enemies can be a bit weak. There are really 3 groups of enemies. First is the OD, the Mutants. These are the mutated baddies. I'll explain how they got this way in a little bit, but they're just covered with gross mutations. These are the most unique enemies, and honestly, I like the design of this because I haven't seen much of this before. Admittedly, I don't play much horror, which is where this feels like it comes from. The other 2 groups in the game, well, ugh. Alright, there's the Scabs, and that describes them pretty well. They are humans, but they just feel like they're filling in for other enemies, and they have no real personality of their own or feeling, just typical enemies in a game. And if we're talking about humans and mutants, well, of course we're going to have robots. The security force of Fizco. White, sleek-looking enemies, but ultimately just bigger and bigger, tanky enemies until they get to the tank bot. Honestly, these aren't interesting enemies at all. The vibrant look of the world, though, is good, but the fact is after about 20 hours of game time, it all tends to feel the same. Now, it isn't military brown, but it's just very green. It's a nice change, but nothing is really done with this over the course of the game. It's just a hyper-colorful version of the world. And again, don't get me wrong on this. This is, of course, better than many other games, but I kind of also want to think about what it could do, and I would take each of the 3 main islands in the game and give each of them more motif, a unique color palette to themselves. In addition, the music here in the game, which I won't be playing, is solid. They actually have a system where the better you play, the more diversity you get in the music. You kind of get a beat when your style is at level 1, but you get some lyrics at level 2, and so on up to level 3. This whole system is kind of clever, kind of like the old Tony Hawk games did, but a lot of the music made me want to listen to Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones. Let's also talk about the weapons, because Insomniac is actually known for its work with weapons. It's one of the reasons I actually have enjoyed every Ratchet and Clank game, as well as enjoying some of Resistance. You get the whiff of that genius here. The first weapon we actually get in the game is a crass-looking shotgun. Here it is. Double balls. Very mature, guys. But this is called the Flaming Compensator. Okay, yeah, that is clever. Next up, we get the High Fidelity. It's a gun that shoots records that rebound off stuff. Again, a good concept, and listen, both of these are really inventive weapons. So far, so good. Then you are in the Dirty Harry, and we're going to go downhill here. This just is a regular revolver, super powerful, but that's about it. And later on, you'll actually be able to pick up like the AKFU. Funny name, of course, but again, it doesn't do anything that special. It's an AK. Half the guns in this game are inventive. There's a chilling bomb, a couple acid spinners, and these are pretty good. But there's a decent amount of normal shotgun weapons, AKs, revolvers. It actually might not even be 50-50. I think there's actually two guns, like the Captain Ahab, a harpoon gun that shoots out overcharge, which makes the enemy rush towards it like bait, for each boring normal gun. But the normal guns feel far more effective, so you'll probably use them more often. The weapon selection here, though, isn't helped that much by the fact that the PC version on Steam has all the DLC, which admittedly does seem to double the weapon count, but it only does so by giving more powerful versions of each weapon. Here's an example: the Headbanger versus the Dude. They both throw bowling balls, but one is just more powerful than the other by a small amount. Whatever. Now I'm going to put a pin in the gun discussion right now, just for a few minutes, and what I mean by style and gameplay, but the thing is, this is the graphical parts of that. One last thing, though, I do want to talk about when talking about the graphics here is the respawn animations. These are amazing. You'll actually want to die a few times in the game just to see as many of these as you can. You have everything from time travel like Terminator, Mummy's Walk, Coming Out of the Grave, Ringu, and everything else from just how to come back from the dead. I absolutely love these. Honestly, if there's a montage of just the respawn animations, it would be enjoyable. They're that good. So let's talk about the story of Sunset Overdrive. You start as a janitor of Fizco who's having a huge concert to kick off their new overcharge drink, and everyone there is drinking it, of course. Sure enough, this is causing a mutant outbreak because why not? It's really a simple story, but works effectively to put the main character both in danger but also in the heart of the action. Of course, the game devolves into this idea of corporations are bad, at least Bisco, and Bisco tries to cover up their mistakes. Granted, you do have to ignore the fact that even Coke or Pepsi couldn't go through the lengths that Bisco goes through in Sunset Overdrive. I mean, they put up a giant magic wall around the city and are trying to finish off the residents. It's just unrealistic, but go with it, and you should have a good time here. You have an evil, faceless corporation and you're trying to stay alive and escape the city. It works, but as I said, don't really try to dig too deep behind it because it's just supposed to be silly. There's actually also a lot of good references in the game. A great moment is a tutorial where a booming voice tells the player, which is the main character, how to use style abilities. There are a ton of little throwaway jokes that work, such as this Breaking Bad reference. Jesse who needs us to set up a new drug location for him while fighting off a ton of bad guys, and these are clearly from the final seasons of the Breaking Bad show, but they're just throwing out quips. Like I said, there's a ton of references like this. There's a group of millennials always on their phone, a bunch of LARPers actually later on, which are pretty funny. But the thing is, these references actually work because they don't overstay their welcome. They make a couple jokes at the expense of someone potentially, and then it moves on. It's not trying to be an homage or a recreation, which is where these things tend to fail, but just humor, and that's what makes it funny, the brevity of it. Now, there are a number of great characters in Sunset Overdrive, and like I said, they're solid, good, interesting. Though, I admit, I wasn't a fan of at least one group you meet with, but it's still fun to continue to meet these colorful characters as you play through the game. Overall, though, you're probably going to have fun with the characters and a number of quests here. They're interesting with good writing. Even the side quests are actually pretty funny, such as a guy who wants to use the apocalypse as a way to grow his comic book collection, or a late quest where you're collecting quest icons from different people. The gameplay, on the other hand, is more of a question, though, because I honestly am not sure exactly what Insomniac was trying to go for. There's two very clear motifs to Sunset Overdrive. Players are able to grind, bounce off most objects, and it feels like either a version of a game of The Floor is Lava, or something more similar to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I like both of these ideas and concepts, and I would love a great Tony Hawk game. But you're not on a skateboard here. You can just grind rails for some magic reason. It doesn't help that walking around is pretty slow on foot, and not as much fun as the rest of the game. Sunset Overdrive almost feels like it was a different game before it became Sunset Overdrive. I don't think that's the case, but that's just the feeling you get off of it. Much of Sunset Overdrive is focused on style. Grinding, bouncing, and wall running will definitely help you. Enemies will actually find it harder to hit you if you're doing these feats, and you'll generate style that can trigger additional bonuses, such as using this badge system. The problem, though, is that it's an unnecessary addition to the game. You can kind of stand and fight enemies at times, but without the grinding, you just end up getting hit more often. Much of the game is trying to find different things to constantly trick off, which works well for a while, but by the end of Sunset Overdrive, it becomes a little bit more like a chore. There are, however, some very cool pieces of this game, like trying to do an infinite wall run, which is absolutely possible, such as you can see on the screen. It's really common to call this game Tony Hawk with guns because of this idea of style. It's the first thing I thought of as I played it, but the thing is I can't imagine many users thinking of anything else as they play this the first time, because that's really what this game is about. It wants you to grind, it wants you to bounce, it wants you to play with all these features, and it punishes you when you're not doing these tricks. If you can grind, bounce, and kill, well, you kind of have everything that Sunset Overdrive is going to try to make you do. At the same time, that's also about as much depth as the game has. The enemies do get more powerful, but it's more about how quickly you have to change from grinding this rail to the next rail, and if you can keep changing that up, you basically still have it all. The grinding and bouncing aren't horrible. Like I said, if this was just about that, if it was kind of like a Tony Hawk Pro Skater, I'd love this game. When it's a form of platforming, like in this level where you're grinding to open up different valves, it works really well. But a majority of this game devolves into shooty bang bang, or really in this game's case it's probably more like shooty grind bang bounce bang. Yeah, it's not much better that way. As mentioned before though, the weapons can be a bit weak. I ended up using like the AK a lot, but it's a strong weapon, just not very thrilling. However, the sillier weapons don't feel as powerful, and that's why you'd probably use weapons that are a bit easier to use at times, which are all the standard weapons of course. Even the teddy bear with dynamite is really just a grenade launcher. Now, some weapons are of course stronger against some enemies, but the system is more annoying because it seems to favor certain types of enemies. Humans are always easy to kill. The mutants, the ODs, like I mentioned, can be a little bit challenging, but usually are pretty easy, and the robots are just impossible to kill at all points. They take the most damage, and even when a gun says it's extra effective against a robot enemy, it usually takes a lot of use to get there. The mission gameplay, though, does tend to be a typical shooter with these style elements thrown in, but the story here is pretty good. There's actually a lot of funny moments in the game. A great late game mission is about forging a new amazing sword, which was hilarious to play. There's also mission elements like this where you're guarding a train as it's barreling down the tracks, and it's a fun little piece of gameplay. To give credit where credit is due, if you enjoy any of these missions, which you probably will, there's actually the ability to go and replay them from the mission menu, which is something that most games fail to do. So, because of that, I want to give kudos to Insomniac, especially for that feature. At the same time, I do kind of have to call out the side quest system. They're a bit weak. The side quests themselves have no immediate need to finish them. I just wish they would show up in the mini-map as you got closer so you could get pulled back into them. They do appear on the main map even if you're doing a different mission, but unless you have the side mission selected, you'll pass right by them on the mini-map. As mentioned though, the story for many of them are pretty funny, it's just I wish they were a little bit easier to discover. There's also challenges in the game, like the traversal challenge on the screen. There's solid diversions, but not very long. There's actually a lot of different types of challenges. You have traversal, point collectors, smash everything, even a little game show that the player has to participate in for a mission, but gives a variety of tasks to score points. There are also only about 4 bosses in the game, for the most part. This is actually an early boss, which is, again, very well done. And the thing is, I would have liked more of these because the bosses are always inventive and a unique part of the game. And as mentioned, all the DLC is here, which gives 2 different side stories that you can go after. Both of them are worth checking out, but one of them has an amazing final boss as well. There's also a great number of collectibles for people who want to obsess over them, but there's entirely too many of them in this game. While the phones that's shown on screen right now are great, The rest are a bit meh. I mean, sneakers hanging from phone lines, toilet paper on stuff. It's just not exciting to collect all of these, and we're talking about like 100 of each type of collectibles. Very much a grind. There's even more. I mean, there's tons to do here. But nothing feels special outside of what I've already talked about, which is very good. You have chests that respawn, captured people, trucks of overcharge that you can open. All of this, though, amounts to ways that you can get more currency from the game. It's just not that special. Just stuff that to do that will keep popping up. It's the Radiant quests from Fallout, but in this game's format, and they're very minor. So how is Sunset Overdrive overall? Well, it's a fun, interesting, and beautiful romp at times. It really doesn't take itself too seriously, and you shouldn't either, but you'll enjoy playing through it at least one time. There's interesting sights and interesting people. But the gameplay does take quite a bit of getting used to. The controls are fine, but having to constantly grind and bounce isn't always the most interesting way to play the game. It is required here, though. There is, of course, a good amount of content, but I don't know if it lives up to the history of Insomniac's games. Sunset Overdrive is definitely better than Resistance in my opinion, but I don't think it lives up to Spider-Man, Ratchet & Clank's best games, or even Spyro. Still, those are a very high bar that Insomniac has made, and Sunset Overdrive is still a great game. I'm going to give Sunset Overdrive a 4 out of 5. You know, Sunset Overdrive is a solid game, and it's something fresh. If it wasn't for the writing, graphics, and attempting something new, this would be far worse. But Insomniac once again finds a new, innovative take on a genre that seems to have many average games. Though the gameplay does hold this back a bit, the guns, they hurt the final score. You'll still have fun though. Now, that is Sunset Overdrive. It's amazing to see console-only developers finally reaching PC. Supposedly we might even see more, especially with Sony now coming to PC with Horizon Zero Dawn, so I can't wait to see that. The modern gaming world is kind of strange though. If you've enjoyed my review or this video, subscribe and click that bell. Like the video and share it with others as well. All of that helps grow this channel and I appreciate that. I'm going to throw up a couple videos here if you want to see more. We're talking Insomniac games, so let's take a look at the Spyro Reignited collection. And since this is kind of a 3D platformer, let's take a look at another great 3D platformer, A Hat in Time. Until then, I'm King Link, and thanks for watching.